Hello, my name is Gary Gomes. I'm coming to you here from Greater New Bedford Cable Television, and we'll talk about astrology and various related topics. I'm a specialist really in Vedic astrology, but I do dabble in other types of astrology as well. And I just want to recap. We have had some successful predictions over the past few months. We had I think it was kind of a no-brainer, but we had the acquittal or the retention in office of Donald Trump. That was, I think I said that back in November or December, so that really wasn't a big shock. We did have some earthquakes in Puerto Rico, which I did say about a month ago, unfortunately. And we also there were a variety of really good hits if you go back over the previous videos. And a student of mine pointed out to me that I was actually correct about an assassination attempt, but I thought the assassination attempt was going to be here in the United States. It actually turned out to be the assassination of the Iranian terrorist leader. And that actually, a lot of that stuff actually seems to have blown over. And we've emerged relatively unscathed, but we never know. There could be ramifications coming up over the next few months from that. But at least for the time being, it seems to have de-escalated. I'd like to talk about a couple of other things. We're going to make some more predictions, but basically, I think what I'm heading towards is I'm trying to establish a network, and this show shouldn't be seen as being recruitment for more astrologers, but I have been active online for quite a while, indicating I would like to set up an international school of astrology. And this would not necessarily be in opposition to any other school, but set up so that we could have teachers speaking different languages to their own communities as a way of teaching astrology, and it could be all forms of astrology. It doesn't necessarily have to be Vedic astrology. But I think that's an excellent idea, and I think some people are already moving in that direction. And we could also include other subjects like Vastu and remedial measures and things like that. But more so, I'd like to move towards a kind of an astrology which is optimistic rather than fatalistic, and an astrology which shows the possibilities that are open to us rather than the limitations or the fears we have to face. Because I just really think it's unhealthy to look at a chart, and especially I've heard these pronouncements for many years. This person will never do this person will never do that, this person is cursed by such and such a thing in their chart. And it's more than annoying. I think it's limiting and depowering to individuals who go for astrology readings. And I also think that ultimately, if you're brought into this earth not really to pay for your sins. I strongly disagree with that. If we believe in reincarnation, yes, there are certain karmas that we inherit, that we have in our lifetimes, which are not necessarily pleasant things we go through. That's obvious. To human is to encounter obstacles, to encounter limitations. We live in Saturn's world, I'm fond of saying, and Saturn is a planet of limitations and restrictions. But it's also a planet that's foundational. We could build structures from it. We can build ways out of our difficulties and our problems. So that being kept in mind, I'm going to talk more about remedial measures over the coming months. And I'm also going to start integrating the way other astrological systems and placement systems are working, and how they correspond and how they don't correspond with Vedic astrology. And so I promised you I would talk to you about Chinese astrology. I'm going to start taking baby steps. This is the year of the rat. It's considered to be actually a good year, an auspicious year, but it's also a year of change. And ultimately, rat years bring new things in. They bring in alterations. They bring in new aspects of life. So they're considered lucky years, but they're also rather disruptive years. And by disruptive, again, I'm not saying a lot of astrologers are predicting wars. A lot of astrologers are predicting we already have quote unquote an epidemic, which looks like it's actually coming under control pretty quickly. As I think I didn't say it, but I felt that when I saw it first manifest about a month ago. And a lot of these things that we're looking at right now are like what I would call small explosions. They're not really big earth-changing events. I think you're going to see a much more conservative world over the next 2 years, though, to be honest with you. A much more, you're not really going to see a really liberal or progressive take, at least in this country, for another couple of years. And I also think the economy is going to be relatively strong and relatively stable in this country for the next 2.5 years at least. The other thing is, though, and I want to go back to this, we were talking about Chinese astrology, and we were talking about some of the implications. And things like feng shui, people may have heard about feng shui. Feng shui is called the Oriental art of placement. And it's essentially, in the Indian tradition, there's a parallel tradition called Vastu. Vastu is more fixed. So essentially, if you set up the house traditionally, you set up in auspicious directions, and that's the way the orientation of the house is set. Now you can modify it according to different years, but essentially if the house is built, it's built, and that's the structure of the house, and it's set according to the most auspicious direction. In feng shui, there's more room for improvisation, let's say, because, and like many of these systems, keep in mind, many of these systems were not built for ordinary working class people. They were built for people who had lots of money. So in some of the Vedic remedies in astrology, you'll see things like expensive gemstones, like gemstones that would cost thousands of dollars nowadays. And you also see recommendations in early feng shui for putting a mountain range behind the palace. So these are things that only really rich people could afford, and usually nobility. And that's essentially, so astrology and traditions like feng shui didn't originate among the people, they originated among the ruling class or people who had a lot of material resources to accompany them. And as time went on, there were what we would call, and also among the priestly castes in every country, but as time went on, they started to develop what I would call less expensive or less costly alternatives to these traditional methods for remedial measures. And if you go into a chapter in the chapters on remedial measures in Brihaparashara or Shastra, number one, they name remedial measures that are present right in the chart. So if certain combinations exist in a chart, it's like an automatic blessing takes place to the person. But they also have these remedies for statues, and the statue should be this height and made out of this kind of metal and installed in this kind of an environment. And they're very specific. And I've never seen anybody actually take the remedies from Brihaparashara or Shastra, which is considered the Bible in Vedic astrology, and really apply them except in a very general way. And the gemstone remedies there's a lot of debate about the gemstone remedies, whether or not they always work, because some people dispute they're intended as remedial measures, they're just intended to be rulership. But I can't see them being mentioned without some intention of them being used by people. So long story short, feng shui this year, in feng shui this year, there are generally inauspicious and auspicious directions in the feng shui chart. So they divide the house into essentially 9 segments. I had to stop and think for a second. And right now, the eastern segment of the household is considered inauspicious. The center of the household is subject to burglary. That's one of the indications in feng shui during this year. The south is subject to disease. The west is a good direction. That's actually completion. And the north is subject to quarrels. The good directions are the northeast, which is great success, luck, and the southeast is prosperity. The southwest is good for study, but also good for what they call peace blossom luck, which essentially means love luck. Okay, and the west is good for completion, and the northwest is good for fortune. So you only have a few areas which are difficult, and usually in those bad areas, they recommend you clear out the space. So east, north, south, and so it's east, north, and south. Those are the really, really difficult areas. And they normally indicate you clear out those areas and don't undertake any major construction projects in those areas. So if you're planning on doing renovations in that part of the house, try not to do them this year. If you're planning on doing renovations, especially outside the house, try to avoid those this year. And there are certain objects which you can put in those sectors, which I'll tell you in the next episode of our program, which can actually mitigate the bad luck. There are also certain things you can put in the north, south, northeast, southeast, southwest, west, and northwest sectors, which will enhance the luck of those sectors. And it's interesting because as I'm looking at the feng shui, again, which is based on Chinese astrology, feng shui is based on Chinese astrology, the directions actually make sense because, and especially the first 3 months of the year are supposed to be particularly quarrelsome. And if I look at the Vedic chart, the first 3 months of the year have Mars, which rules the south, in the same sign with Ketu, which aggravates Mars. And then Mars moves into Capricorn, where it's exalted, but it'll still be kind of ticked off because it's with Saturn. Jupiter rules the north. It's in the same sign with Ketu and Mars for the first, for about 9 months. So that rules the north. And so the north and the south are taken care of. The east is the sun. Now the sun is usually a neutral planet, but the sun is exalted in Mars sign of Aries, so that'll affect the sun. So those three planets will tend to be difficult this year. It doesn't mean they'll be impossible to deal with, but they'll be difficult planets this year. So those are the planets you should try to pay attention to in the chart as an astrologer. Now, overall, I want to talk about some general planetary indications over the next month or so. So this will be for March. And starting in March, actually starting in February 16th, or February 15th, excuse me, we have a Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde is fairly common. The way many Western astrologers figure it, there's only really for about half the year we're under the influence of Mercury retrograde. So this is something you should not be stressed out about because it's a 3 week before and a 3 week after, and Mercury retrograde happens 3 times a year, so it's 27 full weeks we're under the influence of Mercury retrograde. And if you don't do anything during those periods, it's silly. You'll waste half the year. So you have to do some things. And a colleague of mine, Jim Kelleher, has actually done some experiments where he's actually tried to do things during difficult planetary periods or aspects, and they could be done. They were done with some difficulty, there was some accidents involved, but they could be done. So it doesn't mean you can't really do these things successfully. It means there will be some adversity or some struggle or some resistance. And there are definitely times when you shouldn't be doing certain things just because they won't come to fruition. Like an astrologer is supposed to say to a person, ask them a question when Saturn's in the 7th house from the rising sign, should I undertake this activity? The astrologer should just say, I can't answer that question at this time because it won't. Essentially, Saturn doesn't like aspecting the first house. It essentially hurts the significations of whatever house is aspecting. So when those times come up, you just say to the astrologer, okay, can I ask you at another time? And the astrologer will say yes, and you'll have another way around it. But you don't have to force the issue and say, I can't ever do it. It just may not be the right time. All right, so as we're looking at the planetary combinations, I'm looking at, and I've spoken about this before, around March 4th, we're going to have a really interesting combination, which parallels but not exactly matches the September 11th, 2001 combination of Mars, Jupiter, and Moon and Rahu and Ketu being in opposing signs. I don't think this is going to indicate any kind of like major terrorist activity or even major earth-changing activity. Will there be more accidents around this time period? Yes, but I generally think January 4th or roughly December 26th through January 25th was a much more difficult time for most people than this period coming up after February 15th when Mars approaches Ketu will be. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't have some problems, because if we look at the chart, but also many planets are well placed. Venus is exalted during when Mars enters this sign. Jupiter's in its own sign. Saturn's in its own sign. The Moon is relatively well placed and rather unobstructed for most of this period. So to me, this is really not as upsetting a period as most astrologers are saying. I think there's a little bit of there's some justifiable concern when you see combinations like this. I'm not saying the astrologers are wrong, but I don't think it's going to be a catastrophic period for people like some people are forecasting. So, what are the areas that are most affected between March 1st and March 31st? Well, we have the west coast of Canada has a Mars line running through it. Western Mexico and western United States around Idaho and New Mexico and Montana has a Saturn line running through it. There's a Sun line running through New York. There's a Mercury line running through Washington, D.C., but that's really not a detrimental line. There is a Moon line, though, running through through roughly the center of the country, right where it starts in North Dakota and goes all the way down through Texas and Louisiana, and goes off to the tip of Brazil, the eastern tip of Brazil, and that could indicate some flooding or some problems with water during that period of time. There's a Moon line over Finland and Africa as well, and so again, more water danger during that time. Also some wind danger, because the Moon is also a windy planet. There's a Rahu line going over Iraq, so we can expect some additional problems in Iraq and near the Middle East, but not really far west of that. And again, Madagascar seems to be getting on these lines, and so does Moscow. The other difficult planetary lines are in far western India, or close to it, and middle Russia. And there's some danger of flooding in China, it looks like. And also a lot of fiery activity in Australia again, and even some drought in Australia again. So again, the major planetary lines haven't changed all that much from when we looked at them last month. The area I probably look at most for problems, though, is probably Iraq, Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and that's mainly. But again, it's nowhere near the centers of population of Saudi Arabia. In Iraq, it is close to that. So again, there has to be a lot of caution in those parts of the world. Those parts of the world will be very sensitive. But again, I'm not seeing a war breaking out this year. If so, these will be relatively minor conflicts. The Mahadishas aren't ripe for war. The planetary periods aren't ripe for war. It does look like there'll be continued problems in Syria, though, which you don't need an astrology map to see, and definitely some problems in the European Union, especially in France and Germany. So I think there's going to be a lot of anxiety, and a lot of what I would call a lot of what's happening in the United States in terms of problems focusing around immigrant populations and people feeling a little bit feeling more nationalistic than normal. A lot of anxiety around those kinds of things. So that's not going to go away for at least another couple of years. And so the United States is by no means isolated in its fear of external influences. So looking at the chart for this month, if we're looking at Aries, for Aries it's a good time for relationship life. So this is the sun between April 15th and May 15th from a Vedic chart. So this is a good time, so people will feel very, very animated and very, very actively seeking a relationship partner. For Taurus, it will also be a good month, and also for Aries, it'll be a relatively good month for realizing career ambitions. A lot of fame and a lot of acclaim going to them this month in March. For Taurus, fame and recognition is promised as well, but also more secretive relationship issues, more secret issues, and more dissatisfaction with their overall life. Just wanting some kind of an outlet and some kind of way to express themselves. They'll have more problems and more arguments with relationship partners. For Gemini, this is between June 15th and July 15th. That particular sign will have a lot of attention play to it. There'll be some worries about image or about how they're viewed in the world, and also relationship life will be troubling. They'll tend to have arguments or fights with relationship partners, which will seem to be not go away for about another month or so after that. For Cancer is going to have a lot of expenses this month. Relationship life will seem committed, but a little bit tedious, unfortunately. They'll be a little bit too heavily bound in relationship matters, and relationship life will seem difficult. For Leo, good for overcoming health issues, good for relationship life, good for money, good for financial growth, but there will be certain signs that they're unhappy, and there will be problems to their children in March. And this continues through April. For Virgo has, again, some dispute over where to live. They'll be feeling a little bit unhappy with their career life. They'll be feeling a little bit discontented with career life. They'll also feel like they want to leave. There'll be more fights at home, more arguments at home, more arguments about property, maybe even some risk of people trying to appropriate property from them. And relationship life will seem strange or a little bit detached, but it won't be that horrible. For Libra, actually a very good month for them. Libra has a lot of planets placed in favorable houses. So this sign will actually show a lot of progress this month, a lot of drive in realizing their ambitions. I feel great because I'm a Libra rising, but a lot of drive in fulfilling their ambitions, a lot of success. Moon is in the 8th house, so there'll be a lot of investigation or a lot of research going on for this sign over the next month and a half. But overall, it'll be a good period for them. For Scorpio, money will come in, money will go out kind of quickly, but it'll be spent on necessary matters, will be spent on things that need to be addressed, but they'll feel a little bit helpless or a little bit trapped, and they'll have to really buckle down. They'll be extremely money conscious during this month. This sign will be extraordinarily money conscious this month. And they might, in fact, find themselves thinking about changing relationship life or considering changing relationship. Towards the end of this year, a lot of Scorpio and Taurus risings are going to hit a lot of issues connected with relationship life. So that's something to keep on your radar. Sagittarius, it continues to have kind of a difficult year, but Jupiter's in the sign. It's not with Saturn anymore, so it's going to make them less likely to terminate relationships, and it'll make them more willing to reconcile and to work with relationship partners. But relationship partners will still be kind of difficult to deal with. Career-wise, they're going to do fine. Career-wise, they're going to get new opportunities and new advancements. Capricorns, Saturn's in its own sign in Capricorn right now. That's what they call Adani Yoga in Vedic astrology. So this sign will have a lot of work this month, a great deal of work. But it will be useful. They'll have a lot of their dreams and ambitions fulfilled. They'll be happy in romantic life, it looks like, happy at home. And also some minor illnesses look like they're popping up, but nothing serious, nothing life-threatening. For Aquarius, Aquarius has the sun in the sign this month. Very, very auspicious for them in terms of them shining brightly, in terms of them moving forward. A lot of this sign, a lot of expenses for them though, in all honesty. I mean, that's the downside to this particular replacement. But also a lot of gains from unexpected sources. So you'll actually see a lot of additional money coming in, but it'll flow out as quickly as it comes in. But they'll be very polite, very willing to sacrifice, very willing to accommodate and they'll also be very willing to help out people, and their career life will be good. For Pisces, Pisces will have good income, less ambition than normal, and also interested in changing career, interested in changing work life, but not sure which direction they're going to go in. So that's it in a nutshell for this month. I'll come back with some more feng shui remedies and some Vedic astrology remedies for you next week. I'll also start mixing in some of the lesser known techniques in Vedic astrology so you can become more familiar with them. And I'll be posting some additional videos on YouTube apart from this session. So, as always, it's been my pleasure and honor to talk with you, and I hope you have a blessed week, and namaste. There's more to come, much more and much better, and we'll be working towards that universal school. Thank you.